makerspace, but for like real things mostly. And they have like full machine shops,
CNC,
car lifts,
laser cutters.
They have several laser cutters and like 3 or 4 3D printing machines. So they get kids going in there. There's a kid who's right now in the process of building a 3D printer by using a 3D printer to print the parts to build a 3D printer.
Wow.
That's so
That's when the machine starts to take over.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that is his goal. Oh, that's really loud, isn't it? All right. Okay. Everybody can hear me all right? I'm Will Sadler. I'm very happy to be back at Cali. It's been 14 years. I think the last time I spoke here, I'm pretty sure my daughter was in a stroller, and now she's about to turn 15. So I think it was 14 years, but that's just an estimate. The last time I was at Cali, strangely enough, I was talking about Java J2EE application servers, which were then a fairly brand new thing, and there had been this brand new thing released at that point called JBoss, which of course now has taken over, has put companies out of business like the one I worked for at the time, Silverstream, which was selling a J2EE application server. They were based here in Boston. They're gone forever. So I wanted to, in the context of the next wave, which is the theme, basically tell you what I've been doing a little bit in the last couple of years and what I sort of see the next wave in terms of computing, particularly JavaScript, to be here. So let me get an idea. Who here is an actual, I don't know, should we start at the top or we start at the bottom? So if I say things like, do you know what model view controller is and stuff like that, okay. Do you know what a framework for doing model view controller in JavaScript is? Okay, all right, so a lot of you know that. So who knows nothing at all? I know Ken is here, and, and John raised his hand too. All right.
Admitted it right up front, so that's why he
That's called a preemptive heckle, Ken.
Oh, yeah. So I'm going to make Prezi move around a lot because I understand you're not supposed to do that. All right. So in the last year, maybe 2 years now, this project started at Google. This isn't actually running. That is really weird. All right, there we go. About 2 years ago, these guys at Google came up with this way to put together quickly and easily with one command that you type in the prompt everything you need to do to write a JavaScript application, and they called it Yeoman. And it basically uses 3 different technologies. Boy, Prezi is a total failure here, isn't it? So you need, when you start doing JavaScript applications, you really have to have a whole bunch of stuff that's in place at first for you to get started. You have to have, of course, a machine, preferably something running a Unix operating system of some kind. You have to have some libraries that you can use to get started. And if you've done Java development, you know that those libraries usually come as jar files. It's kind of the same for JavaScript. You have to also have decisions about what to use. And that's really sort of the big problem right now with the whole open source software development world, is that there are millions of ways to do everything. And even if you pick a particular thing, there's millions of ways to do stuff inside of that particular infrastructure or world or whatever it is that you're working with. So, and if you go out there looking for answers from people like, okay, what's the best way to do X or the best way to do Y? Very often the good programmers will tell you that, well, it depends. It depends on what your project is, right? I don't really decide what I'm going to do in a particular context, or even what technologies or what technology stack I'm going to use, until I know what the problem is that I'm trying to solve from the business perspective. However, there are things that are becoming evident, to me anyway. And some of it is just personal preference. Some of it is actual real-world experience. I mean, you can look at things like which websites are using, in the JavaScript world, Backbone, for example, or Angular, or something like that. There's also a certain amount of groupthink, I guess you would say, about how many people are answering questions about particular things on Stack Overflow. Because for me, I work on a team of like 14 JavaScript developers, and I work from home, so I only communicate with them via IRC and Google Hangouts and things like that. But I'm constantly plugged in to not only them to ask questions, but to the internet as a whole, right? So if I am working with a technology that's really cutting edge and I can't find answers to things, that's going to slow me down a lot. So you really, at least for me, the only times I want to use something that is brand new, bleeding edge, is when I really have to use that for a particular reason. So things to take into place, but opinions have been built, and Yeoman is an opinionated framework, which I think is a very interesting idea. It's a way that you can go out and you can use their system to build scaffolding, all the stuff you need to put together particular applications. And if you go and you look at their website, yeoman.io, I think, or yeoman.org, is it yeoman.io? You will see that they have a list of generators, which are approved generators. So basically, these are generators that have been developed by the people at Google. And then they have a list of generators that are community generators. So anybody out there says, I want to use this particular JavaScript library with this particular JavaScript library. Like I want to use Angular JS for developing front-end stuff. I want to use Node with Express on the back end. They can put together a Yeoman generator that basically just does that for you. So these are the three things that are important. Yo basically provides you the scaffolding, so it's the Yeoman world. Grunt is what you use for building your JavaScript stuff, and builds. I say build. Build is actually quite complicated. So Grunt does more than just compiling your code for you. It can do that. But it can also do things like run processes. So you start up your server, it'll start your server for you, and it'll watch when you make changes to your code. And as you make changes to your code, it will reload your code for you. So if you've got a browser open, you can change your JavaScript. The browser will automatically reload. You see the change. So if you've ever done any kind of iterative development where you have to like stop the server, make a code change, compile, wait 5 minutes, redeploy the server, wait 10 minutes, run the server, navigate to the page, look at the page, you can see where this would save you hours and hours of time developing software. There's also things like minification, stuff that becomes important just in the JavaScript world alone when you're deploying a JavaScript application, like minification, putting all of your JavaScript files, which are 40, 50, 60 files, together into one file, and then making that as small as possible so that it can get down to the browser and load quickly for the end user. Tons of stuff like that. And people have developed, in the whole Grunt world, there's tons of these things, where they've developed plugins for Grunt that allow you to do various kinds of tasks that you need to do in the process of not only just developing an application, but also deploying an application, taking it all the way to production. Now, Bower is a little bowerbird there, which implies building something, is a package management for JavaScript libraries. So the other piece here, which is missing because it's what Yeoman is built on top of, is called the Node Package Manager, NPM. And NPM gives you a way that you can basically install Yeoman on your machine, and then install all of the packages, all of the libraries that your JavaScript application needs, and Yeoman will take care of that for you if you're using Yeoman. You can use, NPM has its own set of scaffolding and inits and things as well, and there are people that just use NPM for doing this stuff, but NPM is sort of the basis of all of this, and you can easily manage all of those packages, but then Bower is what you use to manage your JavaScript libraries. So I think I said earlier that this stuff is very fragmented, And it is. I'm going to spit out a lot of names here, so stop me at any point if I say something and you want a definition. I'll be glad to try and provide it. Because there are a lot of little pieces. It's much different from working in the Microsoft world, for example, where you have TFS for your source control, you have .NET and C#, you have Visual Studio. That's it, right? There's like maybe 3 things you got to know. It's somewhat similar in the Java world with Java J2EE stuff, though there's different libraries and things there, so it's a little more complicated. In the JavaScript world, it is all over the place. The 2 things that I think are common at this point, though not always common, are people use GitHub, which if you're not familiar with GitHub, it's free, go up, sign up for it. It's a source code control system. It allows you to not only keep your source code somewhere and let other people share it if you want to. You can pay a little extra if you want private repositories. But it has a what's called the PR queue, where people can submit pull requests, PRs, to your code. And what's happening a lot with a lot of these open source projects now is that people will put the code up on GitHub, and then you go and you say, I really like this, I want to use it, but I need to modify this little piece of it, or I found a bug in it or something like that. You can actually submit a pull request for the author, the maintainer, and he or she can look at it and say, yeah, I'll take that and pull it in. So you actually get true open source development going on with that stuff. So GitHub is sort of common to all of these things. I'd be very surprised now if you found many frameworks or packages or anything where people are actually they're not storing their stuff in GitHub. The other thing that is somewhat common, and this is a little weird to me because I've spent most of my life trying to get away from this, is that most of the developers aren't really using fancy kinds of IDEs, integrated development environments, to do their work. They're using like Sublime, which is like TextPad, really. I mean, that's all it is, except it comes out with black and white instead of...
What do you use?
I actually use Webstorm, which is from a company called Webstorm.
Webstorm.
Webstorm. And it's more of an IDE, but it's specifically an IDE just for JavaScript development. But there are...
Komodo or Aptana?
I've never used them. Yeah. But okay, so this is sort of an example, and you guys are probably, if you're developing something, you're by yourself, so you're not really on a team, so you don't have these issues. But one of the huge issues at a corporation, for example, where you go in, is they want to control what it is you're doing. So they give you like a Windows machine, and it has Eclipse installed on it, and you must use Eclipse to do your development. The way the JavaScript world is right now is that everybody uses whatever they want to use, right? It's bring your own device. And you just have to know, as a developer, you have to know what device works best for you and whatever to do. So, I mean, that's not really a problem that you're going to have in small law school development systems. But it might help you feel better to know that the rest of the world is going that way as well. All right. So every application needs stuff before you can start coding. You've got your testing. I didn't talk about testing. So this is the other big, huge change. I guess it would be the third pillar. And I myself am not a huge advocate of some of these methodologies that are out there. But I work with people who are, and I know a lot of people who are really believe in them. So if you're building a website, for example, think about it. You maybe start with some HTML, you put in a head tag, you put in H1, whatever, test, whatever. You forget to close it. You press the button, it says whatever. It probably doesn't matter, right? Because the browsers ignore the valid HTML anyway and show it to you. But you do that process of iteratively testing it until it works, right? Part of doing good JavaScript development now is making sure that everything you write actually has an automated test that runs in the background, or every time you do a build. And this is another thing that Grunt provides you, is that it will run your tests for you. So you don't have to do it with everything. There are people out there, they do what's called test-driven development, TDD. They are zealots, to put a fine point on it. And they're right, which is sometimes the hardest part of talking to them, is that they are in fact right. There is a way that you can write code where you start by writing a test, and your test will fail, and then you go and you write the code to make the test pass, and then you run your test again and it will succeed. You know, it's a red-green refactor is what they call the pattern. You write a test, you write some code, you go back, you write your test, you run your test again until it's green, you write some more code, your test will be red. You fix the code, it'll turn green. You just do this, you do this pattern over and over again. And the benefit of doing that is not only that you get complete coverage of all of your code by the time you're done, but the fact that building the tests will help you design the code better. Because there are very often things that as you're writing code, you get into it, you start doing stuff, you go down a path, you come back, and you realize that, oh, this is never going to work, right? And the process of creating the tests as you go will very often prevent that from happening. Now, I use really what's called behavior-driven development, which is slightly different in that I don't do tests for everything. I only test things that I think are important and that are easy to test. And the reason for that is that a lot of this stuff is very hard to test. You have to have frameworks like Jasmine is the one that I use a lot for testing JavaScript. To know how to code in Jasmine is just as difficult, if not more difficult, than knowing how to do like AngularJS or something like that, or Backbone. It's an entire world of coding that you have to learn just to produce the code that will actually run. So I kind of have a more pragmatic approach to it in how I work, but I work on teams where everything must have tests. You cannot check in anything until it has tests that go with it. And you not only have to have unit tests, which are tests that check individual pieces of code, unit of code, like a class or a method or something like that, and use mocking to provide inputs and outputs, but then they don't actually need things like a database server or a web server or whatever running. You have unit tests, and you also have functional tests, which are tests that actually do need a database server or do need a web server or whatever to run. And the good news, I guess, is that more and more you can, through these languages that are slowly evolving and getting better that allow you to do testing, you can get fully functional automated tests that can run as part of your build process. So it's very common to have tests that, with your unit tests especially, you can run a suite of like 300 tests in like 2-3 seconds, which means that every time you make a code change, you're not only testing that the change that you just made is passing, but you're also testing the fact that nothing else has broken, which is really, really important, especially when you're working with other people. All right. Libraries. Linting I mentioned a little bit. Minification. Live reload I talked about. I already did all that. All right. So how do you do this? There's lots of things out there that you can use. And this is where the opinionated part of it comes in, I guess, is that it's up, I mean, it depends sort of on what you know, what other people you know, as to what you're going to pick to do. The thing that I'm going to show you today is Angular. I like to use Angular with something called Angular UI Router. Angular comes with a way that you can set up routes in your code, and Angular UI Router is a kind of an extension of that uses states for routing instead of paths for routing. But that's just my preference, right? I mean, a lot of people like that too. Jquery is, as I was kind of probably harshly criticizing Jquery earlier, because it does have some issues. But jQuery is the foundation for a lot of this stuff, jQuery and Ajax, of course. I like to use Jade. Has anyone heard of Jade here at all? So Jade is like writing HTML, but you don't ever have to write an angle bracket or close a tag. Or what else does it let you do? It lets you, there's a ton of stuff. But Jade is really a nice, clean way of writing HTML, and it doesn't look like HTML, I guess. It looks more like, if you've used CSS, it looks more like a CSS file at the end of what you're done.
Is it a markup language?
Yeah, it's sort of like, okay, so the other thing that, and I don't have it on here, that I use is Coffeescript, right? So is anyone familiar with Coffeescript at all? Okay. So Coffeescript is JavaScript, and you can turn Coffeescript into JavaScript. And basically, most of the stuff that's in Coffeescript now will be in the next version of JavaScript, ECMAScript 6. But it doesn't look the same at all. It's in JavaScript, you have to end every thing with a semicolon. You do not have to do that in Coffeescript. It just assumes that there's a semicolon there because of the way you use white space to structure the code. So instead of just having a long string of code that can have anything in it, no, white space does not make a difference in JavaScript at all. Same as in HTML. White space does make a difference. And that's sort of the biggest change, is that when you're working with it, you have to know, okay, I've got to tab everything. You usually decide on 2 spaces as a tab. You know, you tab things over, and then based on the nesting of the code, it knows how to put the semicolons in. And things like, instead of having to write, you know, paren, function, paren, payload, variable, you know, whatever, angle bracket, to write your function, in Coffeescript you just do a little arrow like this. And it knows whenever it sees that arrow that it's going to create the, that same JavaScript. So you have, using Grunt, you have these tasks that run that will turn your Coffeescript into JavaScript and will turn your Jade into HTML. So there's sort of a preprocessor kind of thing going on here that you're using. But these languages help you be more productive. And that's kind of the whole point, is being able to not only have better code, but to have code that takes you less time to write and is easily converted into something that's going to run better in the browser. All right. So Lodash. This is kind of like alphabet soup here, isn't it? I mean, I know that I was throwing all this stuff at you. Has anyone heard of underscore? Okay, so underscore is a library. Do you like? Yeah. So underscore is a library that lets you do things like, if you have a collection of objects or an array, you don't have to write a for loop that says, you know, for I in I's, you know, blah, 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 blah. You don't have to write any of that. With underscore, you just say underscore.find, you give the name of the collection, and then you give a function that tells it what to find. And it returns what you want to find. And it's got hundreds of these. They're sort of little helper methods, right, for dealing with collections, for dealing with arrays. It's all over the place. Lodash is an improvement to underscore, hence the name Lodash. So it's sort of like yeah. So it's sort of like Angular UI-router, in that they took underscore and they added some stuff into it to make it a little sweeter. So I like to use Lodash. Okay, Node. Node is up there. Node is the thing that most JavaScript applications are running on now that are out there in the world. Heroku is a framework. You can go out there, you can sign up for a Heroku account. It'll let you publish Ruby on Rails. It'll let you publish Node. There's 2 other things that I think you could do on it. But basically, you can go out for free right now. And this is so weird to think of, all the begging and borrowing that I had to do 15 years ago to get a Spark station so that I could run a Perl HTTP server. Now, I can go out onto AWS or onto Heroku or whatever, and I can sign up, deploy my application, and it is up and it's on the web, and anybody can get to it and do whatever they want in a matter of, you know, minutes, if not less. Node is all JavaScript. And the thing that I usually use on top of Node for more things, for developing a REST API is called Express. So Express is just a JavaScript library that lets you very easily build a REST API. Okay, so who knows what a REST API is? Okay, so you guys have been using REST. So there, I don't know, Tom, you probably remember when several years ago, 10, 12 years ago, SOAP was being touted as like the be-all, end-all next thing that was going to save the web with web services. And over the course of a few years, it became apparent that SOAP was very heavyweight and wasn't going to really do easily what people were saying it was going to do. And people started like making stuff that actually worked and using web services. And REST sort of became adopted out of all of that. The entire idea of a REST interface is very simple, really, though I've seen people almost want to pull out knives and stab each other over some of this stuff. You have a thing, right? An object of some kind. We'll call it a thing. All right? There are 4 different operations you can do on that thing. You can get that thing, right? You can update that thing, which is called a put. You can create that thing, which is a post. Or you can delete that thing. So, a REST API is basically a semantic way of knowing that if you have an endpoint that's /thing, and you do an HTTP GET on /thing, you're going to get all of the things. So that's going to return a collection of everything that's out there. A GET with an ID is going to return the thing that has an ID of 1. So if you said /thing 24, it would return you the thing with an ID of 24. If you wanted to update the thing, you do an HTTP put command. The response body has the thing or just the element of the thing that you want to update in it, usually, with the ID. And because you're doing an HTTP put, the server knows, okay, I'm going to get thing number 1. I'm going to change whatever attribute of thing number 1 is in the response body of the put, and then I'm going to save that to the database and return something back, usually 200 to say success. Post, it's going to be a brand new thing. It's going to create a brand new ID for you. The post URL is going to be like this, like the get URL. And it would return the ID to you of the thing. And then a delete would be, I want to get rid of thing number 1. And there's different ways that you can then expand this, like you can pass in, 1, 2, 3, stuff like that. I want to delete all of those things. I never really go much beyond these simple 4 operations. But that's the basics of a REST API. And it's the foundation for things like Express. Out of the box, you can build a REST API to talk to your database very easy. Alrighty, Jasmine, I already mentioned before, is using for running tests. Mongoose. So, okay, you guys probably mostly use SQL databases? Is that true? Not true? Is that still the case? So, NoSQL is sort of the negation of SQL that's out there. NoSQL has come about as a solution for storing JSON. So I should write all these words on the board because we're going to have about 300 of them by the time I'm done. JSON is a JavaScript object notation, I think is what it stands for. And it's just a simple way of representing data in a string, basically. I say simple, and when I say simple, the opposite of simple is XML. So that's really why JSON was invented, was as an alternative to XML. And other MLs that exist. But it is a way of providing structured data. it uses tags and braces and stuff. So you'll have like a curly brace like this and a curly brace like that, and that's your JSON object, and it'll have name and then a colon and then value. And it can have an array of those, and they would have little commas, and then you would get more of them and stuff like that. But you can basically look at a string of JSON data, and you can see not only what it's basically, at some level, it's just name value keys, right? Key pairs. But it can have a little bit of a structure to it. And there are all sorts of tools in JavaScript for dealing with JSON, because JSON is basically the fundamental data that gets sent back and forth between the server and the browser. And the reason that it's JSON and not XML is that, one, XML requires a lot of processing CPU power, which a browser does not typically have. Though there are ways to do XML in JavaScript. But it's lightweight too, right? So everything is being built around the idea that all of your network traffic, anything in the browser has to be as small as possible, as lightweight as possible. So you want stuff that does that. All right. So let me show you some of this stuff. Now I'm on the wireless network, so if you're hitting the network right now, stop.
I'm using Netflix right now. Is that a problem?
Yes, it is. All right, so, well, let's just look at the page here. Okay, so I decide I want to do a project. I want to do it in Angular, and I want to use Express as my backend for my project. So I know I need something with Express and with Angular. I'm going to use, actually, and this is a very common thing, is something called the mean stack. Which is Mongoose, Express, Angular, and Node. And it turns out that there's a generator out there for this. I'll go to the community generators. It's going to load the generators. It's actually loading them out of NPM, so it's going to take a second. And right at the top here we have Angular full stack, which is AngularJS with an Express server. So I can click on that. Notice it takes me to GitHub, where this is all stored. If I want to take this Yeoman generator and modify it myself, I can go over here and fork it and make my own copy and let people use that. Or I can give them a pull request if I want them to add it to their trunk. So there's the readme.md file always tells you exactly what's going on. And it should tell you what to do. It's going to have some prerequisites here. It says you have to have Mongo installed if you want to use Mongo, which MongoDB, I'm sorry. Mongoose is used as a library in JavaScript for talking to the NoSQL database MongoDB. And I started talking about JSON. I completely forgot why I was talking about that. So NoSQL databases allow you to very easily store JSON into them. So they're optimized for storing documents, basically, big, long JSON strings. They have very few keys. You can key tables off of 1 or 2 attributes, possibly, sometimes more. But they're very, very fast, and they handle very large amounts of data. I was working for a while at Weather Central, which is now the Weather Channel, and we had a large Cassandra NoSQL database which stored radar information coming from radars all over the country all the time. And it was fast enough that we could get the radar feed and then serve it up to all of the websites that wanted to pull the data from Cassandra. And just, it's gigabytes of data, basically. It's huge amounts of data, and Cassandra could handle that easily. All right, so here, usage. It says npm install -g generator -angular -full stack. So there are some prerequisites to using Yeoman. You have to install Yeoman, which they give you the instructions for that on a different page, but it's also an npm install. You just say npm Yeoman, install Yeoman. The -g here means global. Most of these frameworks are installed globally so that you can run them from any directory that you want to. The thing that is different about Node Package Manager, npm, from other library management systems is that it gives you the ability to granularly install packages that you want to use in a particular directory. So if you go into a directory and you say npm install blah, there's a directory created called node_modules, and blah goes into there. And no other directory in your system, everything underneath that can use it, but nothing else on your system needs to even know that blah exists on your system. So if you're using Mac, for example, and you need, I don't know, Quartz Express or something like that, you go and you install it, and it's then put on your path, and it's available throughout your complete system. Node basically dices this up so that things are only available in certain context. All right, so it basically says install the generator, make a directory, change into that directory, and then run this command here. So let me just do that and see. Hopefully the network won't kill us here. So I actually have it installed already. So if I just type yo, it should give me a list of all of the generators I have installed at this point, and it does. So I can run the Express Angular generator, just an Angular generator. Here's one with Sequelize. Sequelize is a JavaScript library for talking to SQL databases. And if we get time, I'll show you that a little bit. Here's the Angular full stack generator. So I'm just going to select that one. And it says there, yeah, I could have done that too. Okay, so this is kind of the default stuff here. I forgot I'm not in the directory, am I? I didn't do a CD, so I'm just going to Control-C there. Yeah, I need to make a directory. Now, there's a couple of other things that I like to use, which you have to get through command line. And if you look at the generator page, back here it'll say, it talks about Express, deployment, Heroku deployment. There it is. Jade and Coffeescript. So these do support, if I don't want to use JavaScript, I want to use Coffeescript, and I want to use Jade instead of HTML, I can get that. I just have to, when I init the project, add a couple little command lines switches on here. So I'm going to add those. Oops. Oh, I thought I just made it there. I guess I didn't. And I'm going to add --jade and --coffee. And it's going to give me some cool little line art here, and it's going to say, would you like to use Sass with Compass? Okay, so what is Sass? What is Compass? Sass is a CSS3 library, and it uses, in this case, it's going to say Compass, which is a Ruby gem, which is another kind of an archive that you can use. In general, I mean, this is what I always do. I just always say yes to this stuff and figure out what it means later. But because it must be good if they went to the trouble of including it in the generator, right? Okay, Twitter Bootstrap. Has anyone used Twitter Bootstrap? You know what that is? Yeah. So Bootstrap is awesome. There's in particular, there's an Angular Bootstrap, which is made specifically for use in Angular applications. But it's a way of like getting a whole bunch of icons and CSS and all this other stuff you need to have a nice, clean UI, and you don't have to go invent it for yourself. They've already done it for you. You can purchase these things. There are millions of them out there as too, but Twitter Bootstrap is a real big standard that, and you'll see every website that you go to now, when you hit OK and you get a pop-up, and that pop-up will float down from the top, and then you say yes, and then it will float up again. That's all Twitter Bootstrap. So after you start using it, you start to see other websites that are using pieces of it as well. And it comes, I think it comes with Font Awesome, is that right? So is it a separate thing you have to add? But there's these whole libraries like Font Awesome and Glyph Icon and stuff like that. There's all these free libraries out there of all these images you can put into your application as well. So I'm going to say yes. I'm going to use the SAS version of Bootstrap. Okay, this piece is a little bit weird because the solid green dot means that it's selected. They're giving you this stuff by default. So if you would do what most normal people would do at this point, which is hit the space bar to select it, you're actually deselecting it. So if I want all this stuff here, I have to keep those by not hitting the space bar. So Angular Route is what it uses for routing. Angular Sanitize is for sanitizing URLs. It gives you cookie support. It gives you resource support. Resource is the only thing that we really need because that's the thing that will let you do HTTP requests. But I'm just going to keep all of that. And I'm going to hit Y for Mongoose. And Passport. Passport is another JavaScript library. Provides easy drop-in authentication for things like OpenAM, whatever. I mean, it supports just about everything. All right. So now it's basically created the framework. And it says, I'm going to run Bower install and npm install. So what Bower install is going to do is grab all of the JavaScript libraries, and it blew up. Look at that. And npm install is going to install the npm libraries that it needs. Why did it blow up? Oh, there's a dependency missing. But you can see it's doing its thing. It's a little bit slow.
Will, I'll ask a question while it's doing it.
Yeah?
You seem to be approaching this with great confidence that the optimization step that comes at the end is going to throw out a lot of superfluous stuff that you don't want to see in the user's browser ultimately. Is that confidence misplaced?
No. So, yeah, and this is the biggest. I think Yeoman is a great tool for getting started, especially if you use things like ng boilerplate, which is basically all ng boilerplate does is tell you this is how you structure a large JavaScript application. If you're going to do a real live production grade application, typically you're going to build all of these things in yourself as you need them, and in a way that is going to make sense for your final production deploy. I don't know, does that answer your question?
Just to say that you're saying that if you were serious about this, you wouldn't be throwing stuff in willy-nilly at the beginning?
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely. And I mean, it depends on the purpose of the application, right? You know, if you're just doing something to learn how to talk to Mongo, for example, with a JavaScript application, then something like this is very helpful, right? Because it lets you it's a bootstrap. I mean, that's the entire purpose, is it gets you up and running quickly. And what I've done in some instances is I get up and running quickly, and then I go back and rewrite it again. Okay, so I should have prefaced my entire talk with, I'd been doing JavaScript a little bit. You know, I used to have on my desk at one point, I had something called the JavaScript Bible. It was a book about that thick. It had every single thing you could do in JavaScript in it. And it was probably valid for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, something like that. That was it. 2 years ago, I started learning JavaScript and working on a project where they needed me as a JavaScript developer. I had been brought in to do the back end, and I finished it in like 2 weeks. And then there was still 2 years sitting there. So I started learning JavaScript. So a lot of this stuff is new to me, too. But the point that I think I was getting to is that it's there's a lot of things that just don't make sense until you've been in the space for a while, and you have to and there really aren't good places out there to go and like find out what's the best way to do things. The people don't seem to think there is a best way to do things even.
So I'll ask you a question at the strategic level that tends to hide my own ignorance here. Just on that same point, it seems to me you've got a choice of 3 strategies, right? I mean, one is throw the kitchen sink at it, see what you need, go back and redevelop from scratch again, making strategic decisions about which parts of the sink to use.
Yep.
Throw the sink at it and attempt to pare back without really altering your original code base. In other words, don't redevelop from scratch, but attempt to carve something out.
Yeah.
Or pre-plan in detail and only build in what you need from the get-go.
Right. So there
Where
are...
are you on that?
Okay, so numbers 2 and number 3 are bad. And number 2 is bad from the standpoint of... well, I don't know that it's necessarily bad, but I remember going to JavaScript user conventions where someone would do a presentation and they would say, hi, I'm so-and-so. I just wrote this neat app for managing your audio collection, and they show it working, right? And then they start talking about the process they went through to get this. I wrote this in Jquery. It didn't like that. I wanted to try Angular, so then I wrote it in Angular. And then there were some things there that I couldn't really get to write, so I tried using Backbone. And then there was some other stuff so finally I went back and I rewrote it again in Jquery. And they're not talking about like tweaking it. They're talking about full, complete rewrites of the code. And the only thing that lets you get away with that is that it is very quick to develop stuff for the most part. Part of the development life cycle is sticking stuff out there, throwing it against the wall, see what sticks, figure out as you go what's best, and then redo, iterate. And if you spend all your time in planning, you'll never get there. You'll never be able to plan, partially because the technology is changing so fast that by the time you've planned and figured out what the best thing is, there's something else that's now the best thing. Yes, sir?
A 2-part question. The part of your talk title that interested me was a single-page app. So I'm kind of wrestling with why single-page and when to use single-page apps versus traditional coding techniques. And the other part of the question is, which of these parts are server-side versus
Yeah. So the REST API, the node server with Express, that's the server-side piece. Everything else is client-side. And single-page app, of course, means that there's just one download that basically gives you all of the JavaScript that you need to run the entire application. And the advantage of that is that it minimizes latency, is the big deal. And also it lets you get up and running from page 1, right? So there's certain points in the application lifecycle where the user is expecting to have to wait. And typically that's on the first page, right? They click the button, they understand, I'm going to wait 5 seconds. That's normal. If they have to wait 5 seconds as you're going from page to page, they don't think that's normal at all. A half a second is even too long there, right? So if you can download all that stuff, you front load it, it's all in the browser, it's all running. That helps with that. The other thing is that very often the JavaScript application itself is so tightly knit that you can't modularize it. But there are definitely scenarios where you want to build your JavaScript in a way that people who aren't going to need certain modules don't get those modules until the point that they need them. Yes, ma'am.
Are there SEO
There are.
They don't work.
Yeah.
Can you
It-
elaborate?
Google released a spec for something called shebang URLs. Twitter used them for a while, but I used to see them everywhere. You know, hashbang, exclamation point, and then URL string. Those were what you would do is that you would have a non-JavaScript version of the same URL and have it come in a query string, and Google would know when it saw a link to a shebang URL, it would really query this other URL. Doesn't work very well. Hopefully it will work better with Angular than it did with any of the other ones, because Google actually makes Angular. It is a Google development project, made run by Googlers. I've met a few of them, but I wouldn't trust it because they're making it their 20% time, and they're not on the search team.
Yeah, I mean, most of the best practices come out of practical considerations like, you know, don't put too many objects in the DOM because the browser will slow down. And, you know, you're going to discover a lot of the things that you're not supposed to do through things like performance testing and what have you. Yes, sir.
So what happens when a designer walks in and says, I need it to look like this? And you have to iterate either with the designer or you know what I'm saying? How does
Yeah.
that,
Oh, yeah.
how
Well,
does that
that's...
figure into your workflow?
So, I mean, traditionally you could build websites, right, from the designer starts with wireframes and gives you a bunch of HTML, and you just make a working website out of that. CSS has really made the collaboration of those two things quite possible. Most of the people that I work with now, I think, prefer to actually build the website first and then go back and add the UI on top of it. Because you can build an incredibly simple website that does, you know, let's say you're creating an item in a question bank, right? I mean, there's several fields there, right?
Why would you want to do that? But I don't
Yeah. So the you've got a prompt, you've got options. You can build most front-end developers can build a very simple UI.
Basic function is going to be.
That's right.
You know what it's going to have to do. You just
Yeah.
don't know what the button's going to look
Yeah.
like when they.
So the UI guy comes in and says, okay, I want you to use these images and these fonts and this CSS. I mean, they should be able to give you a CSS file, right? And they should say, okay, I want these CSS classes applied to these elements on the page. And at that point, it's just a matter of saying, okay, I'm going to modify my HTML and apply that CSS class to whenever I have a text input, right? And then instantly all the text inputs will be styled according to that. And if you want to go back and change the CSS later, they'll all change, right? You don't have to go visit every single page in the application and make these changes. You just change the CSS file and you're done. Yeah?
Are these or should these single-page apps under the MVC? They are.
Yeah, well, okay, so there are frameworks that let you do model view controller, and Backbone is one of them. Ember.js is another one that's gaining in popularity. Angular is model view controller as well. They're all a little bit different. They all kind of interpret model view controller a little differently as well.
Do you recommend people approach it from MVC?
You know, it's not as important as it was for developing J2E applications with struts or something like that, where you had to make a really conscious decision about where you drew the lines and basically made things modular and kept functionality separate and layers in your application basically. A lot of the stuff that comes out of the box now has that layering there for you. So like, for example, this application here is the server code here is what's running in Express, right? And the models that are here are the models, right? There's a directory called models. All the models go into there. If you want to use a model and send a model into and out of the database, you have to follow that structure. So it's almost like it does it for you in a lot of ways. All right, I got 5 minutes. My thing's probably still running over there. But at the end, you should wind up with a structured application which has all of this stuff in it for you. And you ought to be able to run it, too. This is the cool part, I guess. let me into my window. Thank you. Oh, well, let's use this one. So that one is stuck. Yeah, I'm not a very efficient command line user. I should be. Here, I'll show you this one. Okay, so I've got my application here. Once it's all installed on your machine, you should be able to go in and just type grunt server or grunt serve, depending on which version of grunt they've provided. And it will start up the application. And you'll notice that it will leave things running, and the last thing it will say is running the watch task. So at this point, if I went over and changed any of this, it would just reload. And I think I can do that. I don't have it up, though.
And when you say reload, this blew my mind. I didn't know you could even do it. It will reload the JavaScript into the browser behind the scenes so that you don't have to refresh the page yourself.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. Which really makes the iterative process of changing things, that whole thing just goes so much faster.
What if it's a big one-page app, though?
So the biggest they should ever get is, I don't know, a megabyte, 2 megabytes, 5 megabytes. I mean, you can kind of push it to 10 maybe, but you want to keep them small as possible. So to load that, especially locally, is nothing. Yeah. All right. Other questions? I know it was just a very quick overview of sort of the space. So I hope I didn't stun you too much, but I mean, if you go out and you can install npm on your machine, you go out there and try and run these commands and just get a project to run, you should be able to make it work, which is, I think, cool. And to Tom's point, not necessarily what you want to put into production, but it gives you a good way to at least get yourself started and get an idea of what's going on. And also looking at they give you rankings too. So you see how many people are downloading X and Y, and you can get an idea of what's popular or what isn't. Though it changes. Like people are using, instead of grunt now, they're using this thing called gulp, which is more of a node piping thing, and it's a lot simpler than grunt because they've gotten mad that grunt is so complicated. But eventually gulp will become complicated, and then there'll be something to, 6 months from now.
The thing about having all those packages that download, and it looks a little daunting, is that a great number of them are, like you said before, pre-processing. Your testing code, all the stuff that Grunt is doing is just development time stuff, and that's never going to make it to
It's never going to make it into production, yeah. So the package JSON file is what defines where your npm modules are installed, and there's 2 sections in there. There's one called dev dependencies.
Right.
That's just all the stuff you need for dev, right? It's got, 25 things in it there. The production dependencies are far less. And a lot of these are smaller packages too that, like Morgan, cookie parser, method override, those are tiny little pieces of code. They're very specialized. They do something that you need. Doesn't really cost a lot to include them in the application. All right, anything else? I hope that this was helpful.
Very helpful.
And
Anytime.
all right. If you have questions, I'll be glad to.
14 more years. Yeah, really. Yeah.
Well, that's my plan, is to come back in 14 years and tell you what's new then, right? Quantum something or other. Hi. Hi, Will Sadler.
I've done very little with Angular so far, but right now I'm doing a lot of work with Foundation.